Spoiler alert. In this show, we talk about Ted Lasso and the show's characters. Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Big Boss Biscuits, the podcast that talks about human-centered leadership and how it relates to one of our favorite shows, Ted Lasso. You know that I love a good story about crossing borders, cultures, and languages, because that's pretty much my life. So when I met today's guest, I was hooked. Mukul Sheopory grew up in India, came to the US, and had to figure out, the way a lot of us do, that speaking English and speaking the same language are two different things. Mukul is a product marketing leader, but he's also the author of Bucephalus Shadow, a book that pulls leadership lessons from Alexander the Great and draws some surprising parallels with folks like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk and other modern business leaders. I read it and loved it. Today, he's bringing that same lens to something very close to my heart: the leadership traits that Alexander the Great and Ted Lasso somehow, weirdly, wonderfully share. We get into culture, communication, psychological safety, one of my most favorite topics to talk in the context of leadership. We talk about the mentors who let you show up before you've got it all buttoned up, and yes, what a 2,000-year-old conqueror and mustached fictional soccer coach can teach us about actually caring for your people. I hope you're going to enjoy this one. I definitely did. And if Mukul's story lands with you the way it landed with me, go connect with him on LinkedIn. Just find his name, Mukul Sheopory, and share your thoughts. If you're curious about the book, you can grab the ebook on Amazon or the paperback version at mukulsheopory.com. Remember, the title is Bucephalus Shadow. All right, biscuits in hand? Well, let's get into it. You are originally from India, came to the US, and worked here. You also have written a book, which I've read, and I want to talk about it. But before we go there, one of the things that I thought about when I listened to your story was Ted Lasso moved from the US to coach a European soccer or football team in London. And even if they speak the same language, they kind of don't speak the same language.
That's right.
And it's similar to India. In India, you have many, many different languages, but you also speak and learn English. And then you come to the US, and is it really the same language?
It's funny you say that, because as soon as I landed, my brother-in-law was running a little late, caught in traffic, trying to pick me up. I didn't have a phone or anything at that time, and I had to ask the authorities, can you help me call my brother-in-law? And they're like, what's the address? And then I had to confirm the address, and I said, whatever the house number was, Old Connecticut Path. I said path like the British English. And they said, what? I had to write it down. They're like, oh, you mean path. So right off the bat, I realized I speak English, but it's a different English.
I'm half German, half Mexican. And I started learning English from, I don't know, age 11. But then coming to the US, even with English as my third language, for me, work environment was a completely different culture and language that I still am learning, to be honest.
For me, it was a very quick indoctrination, because I came to business school and I realized that my accent was completely different, even though I had been speaking English all my life. In India, our schooling was in English. Everybody's fluent in English over there, but the pronunciation is completely different. So I was shy initially until I realized that 40% of my grade is class participation. So I had to get over my shyness really quick to not lose out on that 40% of my grade. So I think by the time I got to work, everything was smooth, and I had gotten over that hump.
I had so many instances where I operated so differently, from my work speed to work ethic to resilience. There were so many things that I did different than my peers around me or even my bosses. I remember getting the feedback, just slow down, you're too fast. And I didn't even know how to translate that into something actionable. And so it created frustration and uncertainty about my work and my role, and then how I communicate straightforward versus talking around the bush. There were so many different things that I did that for me are just normal, but here in the US, they landed not in the best way. And so I had to learn to adapt to that. How was that for you?
I think I was on the other side of the spectrum because I worked a couple of years back in India, and the way work culture is over there is very hierarchical. If you're an entry level employee, you don't speak above your manager. You defer to your manager, who defers to his manager, and so on. So your voice is compromised. And I worked at a marketing agency back in Boston, and I realized that your manager actually wants to hear your opinion. He wants your input. If you're in a meeting and you're quiet, it doesn't reflect well on you. In India, it was the opposite. If you're in a meeting and if you're speaking up, it reflects badly on you. Speak. so so it was a little bit of the other side. So I had to figure out, how do I not sit on the sidelines and actually make my voice heard and make my opinion heard, even if I don't have the experience behind me.
And how did you manage to overcome that?
Luckily, I had good managers who pushed me that way. Growing up in India, the mentality was I need to have everything fully formed, buttoned up before I present my opinion. So they let me come in without everything being completely perfect, and they would encourage me to do that. So luckily, I found the right set of mentors early on.
So often I hear the other side that they didn't have the mentors that who created psychological safety for everybody to speak up. I think buy-in is in many organizations one of the biggest hurdles to innovation because they don't know how to get the buy-in from the people. And that starts by creating a system and an environment in which people are encouraged to speak up.
That's right. That's right.
So this actually brings me to the book you wrote about Alexander the Great and leadership lessons through his story and his achievements in life. You connected your book to modern day lessons of innovation, challenging the status quo, leadership. Tell me about the book.
Yeah, so I was in business consulting at the time. I was working in New York for Deloitte Consulting. And, I took a break from like one major financial planning session, and I stepped out and walked into a bookstore, and I came across a biography of Alexander the Great. Growing up in India, I had heard of one episode of his life where he fought the Indian king Porus, and that too from the perspective of the Indian king. I had no idea about everything else. So I just started flipping through the pages, and I was like, oh my God, this guy should have lost every battle that he fought. Yet he figured out a way in that bookstore for more than half an hour, just flipping through. And then I bought the book and read the rest of it. It was just mind blowing how he was able to adapt to the situation. He was able to use the terrain. He was able to use, something about the way the army had formed for the battle to his advantage. I was doing business consulting at the time, so I started thinking about like what are some of the parallels. And I started writing the book not knowing how it would end. I just went like one battle after the other. Like, what is the lesson from this one battle? What is the business parallel? And then it just like snowballed. One thing that I really loved about Alexander, even though he was a conqueror and a military leader, what I loved about him was he really cared about his people. And you talk about psychological safety, and we're here on a podcast that's inspired by Ted Lasso. I think that Ted Lasso does that in spades too. In the end, winning teams only are the ones that provide that psychological safety to the folks to just try and fail and try again, without.
Were there moments in his life and his leadership where people had an idea and rather than him taking credit, he would encourage them to execute the idea?
I think he always had open conversations with his leaders. I don't have too many examples of where his generals had the ideas and he took those, because it's not divulged at that level. If I go to the sources, they're telling the story as the battle was happening. But what I saw in terms of the aspects of his leadership were inclusion and psychological safety. First of all, he knew the names of everybody in his army, every soldier. And it is interesting because in Ted Lasso, I think it's in the first or second episode where he walks in and the equipment guy, he is like, "What's your name?" And he's like, "Nobody's asked me my name before." he's the lowest on the totem pole. He has no reason to ask the name of somebody who's so low on the totem pole, but he asked for his name. So I felt like that there was that connection. Alexander the Great knew the names of everybody. He ate with them. Alexander had learned medicine when he was growing up. So he would take care of the sick, the wounded. And also after he would win a battle, he would open up the treasury, the treasures of whichever kingdom he had defeated to his soldiers. He wouldn't take the treasure for himself and hand out, leftovers for his soldiers. He would actually open the treasure for his soldiers first, you know.
Yeah.
But given the frame of reference of that time, how many other emperors or kings did that?
Yeah. I don't think any, not the ones that I can remember. I can actually think of a very famous German pirate. There were two. Their names are Störtebeker, and now I forgot the other guy. Störtebeker is a more famous one, and they were essentially the Robin Hood pirates of the Hanseatic League. So they would loot all the big commercial ships in that area, and instead of keeping all what they looted, they just gave it away to their own people and the poor. But you're right, it's unheard of. And even nowadays in modern business culture, it's still not that common that a leader, especially on that high level, I mean, he was a prince and eventually he became the king and conquered a vast territory. And he knew the names of hundreds of his people. I don't know of a CEO of a company of that comparative caliber who would be able to name the people working underneath. And it sounds like such a simple thing. I remember in Ted Lasso, at some point, he comes in, he says hi to the receptionist, he says hi to every single person he comes across as he enters the building. And he says everybody in this building is part of the team. From your perspective, Mukul, such a small detail of saying the name and remembering the names of people around you, why is that so important and how does it make the difference in the bigger scheme of things?
It builds the culture. It makes people feel that they matter. Like even if I go back to the companies I worked in, the companies where the CEO knew my name, even though I was many, many layers below that person, it made all the difference. I worked at GoDaddy where I would email the CEO my thoughts and he would respond in like a day. And we would be chatting. He was interested in drumming. I would talk about like, oh, I saw this documentary on drumming, and he would respond. It was so cool to have that connection versus any other company where I just feel like a cog in the wheel. So it just matters at a person level, and it makes you feel that what you do is adding to something bigger and you're all rowing the same boat, you know.
Yeah. It creates loyalty too,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
especially in this time where we often hear people leave the companies, but it's also because companies are showing over and over that they don't have a loyalty towards their people. We
Right.
just saw Oracle laying off thousands of people supposedly because of AI, when we kind of know that the numbers don't justify that massive layoff. They didn't need to lay off people. They had everything to keep on at the very minimum half of the people that they laid off. So we don't see the loyalty from companies and leaders towards the employees, but often we're expecting that loyalty in return. And here we have people like real people like Alexander the Great and fictional people like Ted Lasso who are showing us that there is a different way of doing business. And that starts by creating a culture in which people matter. You just said that. How can we teach leaders in higher positions that investing in culture and creating that psychological safety, engagement, being in the trenches with them translates directly to high business outcomes?
I've thought deeply about that. You had mentioned in one of your LinkedIn posts the project Aristotle that Google had. There was a research Google had conducted, and what they found was that the most effective teams are not the ones with the star players. The most effective teams are where there is psychological safety, right? And then Google went ahead and did one of the worst layoffs in the world. But psychological safety matters because we are living in an age where innovation is key. right? We're not living in the industrial era where it's about productivity. It's not about how many hours somebody works in a factory. It's about how you innovate using what's in your brain, right? And what helps with that is the security and the freedom that lets people make mistakes. And when you conduct layoffs, the first signal it sends is like, you got to be afraid. You got to be afraid of your role. And when you're afraid, what you end up doing is you try to stay within the box so that you don't get axed. If you're trying stuff, if you're failing, if you're raising your voice, there's a higher chance of you getting axed. If you stay in the box, you do what you've always done, you're probably going to be safer. But if you do what you've always done, at an aggregate level, the company will not innovate. Right. So I think uh, time will tell. The next wave in the next like 5 years or whatever, innovation is going to come from places where there is psychological safety. It's not going to be those uh, massive companies that have laid off thousands of people. It's going to be smaller, more nimble, more coherent companies.
I agree with you. And we see it even in a leader like Alexander, such like old example of an excellent leader. He didn't succeed because he had the manpower, and you outline it in the stories that you narrate very well. Sometimes he had so much lesser soldiers on his side than the opponents or the places he wanted to conquer. So what he had wasn't just strategy, it was a lot of innovation, thinking beyond the traditional way of military warfare or conquering. It was about looking at a challenge from a very creative standpoint, but also listening to the people around him. He would pick up on things in general, just paying a lot of attention of the chatter and the conversations, and then suddenly something would fire in his brain, and he would then say, what if we did it this way? And I mean, it worked because he conquered, so
Yeah.
much, such a huge territory. So how do we translate that into today's modern entrepreneurial world, especially now where we have AI and startups pop up daily, and people have to compete with that creativity and that momentum of constant change and innovation?
Yeah, I think in the end, it's going to be AI. AI is a fantastic technology. I can't even compare to other innovations that have happened in the past. But AI is not going to solve business problems. Again, it comes back to, you may not need as many people as before, right? But you need people who are smart and motivated. You could get people who are smart, but the motivation still comes from your psychological safety, right? Ted Lasso had the whole thing about belief. If you don't have that, then the team is not going anywhere. So the first step is that. And second is like, everybody's voice matters. It's not just about the stars, it's about everybody. He got ideas from the equipment manager, and he also was able to bench their star.
Jamie, yeah, exactly.
Jamie, yeah, that's right. He basically told him that he was a star of the team, but if you're not adding to the team overall, then you're out.
I find myself coming back to psychological safety quite
Mhm.
often. In
Right.
most of the articles that I'm writing, it's really about that, whether it's giving upward feedback to the manager, whether it's the leader creating a space in which people are allowed to challenge him or her, in which people are not afraid of questioning the status quo.
That's right.
Whenever I applied to jobs in the past, I considered myself a work rebel because I like to question the status quo. And maybe it's also culturally in Germany, we're educated to question leadership, to question authority, because history has painfully taught us that when leadership remains unquestioned, you
Right.
know what can happen. And so
Right.
we get this mentality already. And so I like to ask a lot of questions and see, are we solving the right problem? Are we asking the right questions? But I also found that here in the US, that kind of challenging. Not only is it because psychological safety isn't there, but it's also because it's being equal to attacking the leader. And there's this inability from someone in a leadership position to differentiate the personal with the professional or the business. What can we tell leaders from your experience and perspective to overcome that?
What you just described is what every leader should look for in their team. People who can speak up, who can come up with uh, divergent points of view. But again, it's not something you can teach. If the leaders don't have that, I don't think they're leaders. They're just in a leadership role. So Nassim Taleb, the guy who wrote Black Swan, he talks about a philosopher who mentioned that the key thing somebody who's wise does is he surrounds himself with people who contradict him. And if you don't do that, then you just have an echo chamber. You're just having people around you who are massaging your ego and saying, "Yes, you're doing awesome, amazing, amazing." Actually, talking about that, Steve Jobs, he's portrayed as a hard ass. The first chapter in my book is on Steve Jobs, the business parallel. I love him because there was this one interview I was watching. They said that Steve Jobs fired two people on the board of Apple. And the two people he fired were the ones who would agree with him always. He's like, if you're agreeing with me on everything, I don't need you. So that takes courage. That's a leader, right? You cannot teach some CEO to find people who take a opposing stance from your point of view. I don't think this is something that can be taught. There are natural leaders who have that, and then there are people who are in a leadership role somehow. They somehow landed in that place, but they're not really leaders.
It's true. I never thought about whether it can be taught or not
Mhm.
because it connects to humility and emotional intelligence.
Confidence too. Confidence too. Like if you're
Right.
Steve Jobs, you're confident that okay, I can take somebody contradicting me. If you have a thin skin and you don't have that confidence in your own perspective, you're shaken very quickly by somebody opposing voice,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
True. I think you can build confidence and you
Mhm.
can learn humility probably more through failure and through life experience than any course or school. Like it's not something that can be easily learned through courses and practicing it. Humility, it's either you get humbled down or you don't, and then you don't learn it. I also love the Steve Jobs comparison in your book because he was someone who openly said, you need to challenge me. If you don't dissect and tear apart my ideas, then we're not innovating. And even if right now Elon Musk is not the most famous character to talk about, you share an anecdote of SpaceX in your book. All of the examples of Alexander and then the parallels for real in the modern times, for me, they all had the same thread.
Mhm.
Let's challenge the status quo, but we
Right.
also need to challenge me as a leader. Am
Right.
I doing the right thing? Like, let's just throw out convention
That's right.
and everything we know and start from scratch. And as you said, that takes courage. And there's a moment in Ted Lasso where he does the same. Okay. I don't want to say too much, but there is a moment in the show where he does something similar. He has a pivotal moment where he's just wondering, like, how can we win this thing?
Mhm.
And he essentially throws out all kind of roles and the status quo and just comes in with innovation. There are like two parts actually. One where he comes in and is like, all right, everybody just give me your favorite plays. One of those is a American football play. They implement that and they are able to score a goal.
Right. It confuses the heck out of the other team.
And Alexander the Great does the same at some point, right?
Yes.
He creates confusion or disrupts the status quo of his opponent and then does something either the opposite or completely unexpected and is able
That's
to
right.
succeed.
That's right. Yeah, he
So
does that in the battle against King Porus,
yeah,
in
see?
India.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so how can we, or in your work as a consultant, how do you encourage people who are typically from a culture where being amenable, being conflict averse,
Mhm.
right, is more their default setting, like here in the US? How do you teach them to come out of their shells and be the challengers?
The way I've done it is, it's always one on one. So those folks who are either shy or coming from a culture where the hierarchy is the norm and the default, I've always coached them one on one. Because coaching them in a group setting is not the first step. encourage them, ensure that their ideas are good, and and come up first of all, like pull the ideas out, like what are some of the ideas they have, and then and when they're ready, you encourage them to speak up in a more group setting.
And how do you go about teaching leaders to learn to be challenged?
I mean, that's a tougher one. I think that I've not been able to do. That's where I feel like it's a leader either has it or doesn't. That's not, if a leader is so brittle that they would be shattered by being challenged, then you cannot proceed on that one.
Maybe there's also something to be said about the generational differences
Mm.
and how different generations were taught, the models they had for leadership. I know there's a lot of criticism towards Gen Z where they're being accused of not wanting to work, of being so, I don't know, so pansy. And I don't agree with that.
Yeah, neither do I.
Right? I actually think that it's not that they don't want to work. It's just that they're not willing to adhere to the same standards that they were handed over. They're not willing to step into toxic work environments. They're not willing to execute a job just because. They don't want just a paycheck, they want fulfillment. But for a lot of leaders, especially from older generations, they translate that into like, oh my God, they're so difficult and they're so lazy and they don't want to do this and they don't have resilience. That maybe there is something to it, but not 100% in the way they're interpreting it. So I'm really hoping and betting on Gen Z to
Yeah.
push their leaders to do better.
I think the converse can be said as well. I could argue that it's the leaders who are lazy because they're not coaching the Gen Z employees,
Yes.
right? Why do you
Yes.
expect them to salute you and just get in line? Like, why can't you take the tougher road and figure out like how do you coach them? How do you inspire them? Right? If they're
Yeah.
not inspired, if they're not, why would they do it? Quite frankly, like saying that is like myopic because you're not Gen Z. You don't know where they're coming from. They've gotten a very different world. The cards that have been dealt to them are very different from the cards that were dealt to you. Also, you got to have some compassion and empathy before you try to, step in their shoes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Talking about inspiring, how did Alexander inspire his people to do all the crazy
Well,
things he came up with?
I mean, the thing that inspired me to write the book, I loved every battle that he won. I loved the strategies he deployed. I loved the strategy and tactics side of things. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. But what inspired me to write the book was this episode towards the end where he was lost in the Jedrosian desert on his way back from India. And they took the wrong path. They couldn't figure out how to get back to the next destination. And they were at a point where they were running out of water. And all the soldiers in his army collected whatever was left in their canteens and they poured everything into a helmet and presented it to him. And he basically upturned it and let it fall into the sand and said, I will share your fate. I mean, wh- how inspiring is that? How many leaders would do that, right? You have organizations where the leaders come up with a strategy, the strategy falls on its face, and then the people who get laid off are the rank and file. The leader says, oh, yeah, this strategy didn't work, but the leader is still there. The leader is still getting the millions of dollars in their paycheck and the stock worth whatever, but they did not share the fate. They're like, my faults, you suffer, I'm still here. I mean, it's I feel like that was an episode that inspired me to write the book, because I wanted
Yeah.
to uh, highlight that.
Yeah. Which also beautifully translates into ownership and how important it is for leaders to own whenever there's a failure or a mistake and be part of it. One other thing that I wanted to pick your brain on is there's a theme with Alexander where it's like he's a player coach. For military people, you often have to have that, right? They not only have to know what they're doing, but they also are expected to be in the front lines with their people. In business world, I've seen it differently. And actually, that's the one part where I would challenge the concept of player or leader coach. And Ted Lasso, I think it's a good example. He has no clue about European football.
Right,
He doesn't even practice. He
right,
stands on the side. and watches. What he watches is not their technique. That's Coach Beard's and Nate's responsibility. But he observes the behaviors, right?
Right.
He couldn't observe those behaviors if he were in the middle of.
That's
So
right.
how does that difference translate to modern day leadership?
That's a really good question. The biggest role a leader needs to play. First is to build culture, build psychological safety so that everybody is able to give their best and not fear failure. But the second, making them believe. The first is psychological safety. The second is making everybody believe in the mission, believe that, there's one speech where he says, everything we need to win this, everybody who needs to win this is in this room. So that is basically telling that I don't need other players from outside. I don't need people traded in. We will win this championship based on who is here. So having that belief, having that vision. Then the third thing is aligning everybody towards that. I remember there was an interview with somebody who worked with Elon Musk. That person said, Elon thinks of everybody as a vector, and the vector needs to be aligned with the company's mission. And that's kind of what Ted Lasso is doing as well. If the vector is not aligned, it doesn't matter how strong or how skilled you are. If your vector is amazing, but it's pointing in the other direction, it's not moving the ship forward. So when his star player is all about me, his vector is big, but it's pointing in the opposite direction. It's detracting from the sum total. So I think that if you can do it as a player coach, well and good. But if you cannot, then you need to be just a coach because the ability to see that how the vectors align is
that a skill set or an ability you learn? Or how does a leader get to be that observant and insightful?
I feel that there is some level of pattern recognition that happens over time, but I don't know if that's something that is coachable because if I look at all the leaders that inspire me, they had it in them. It was never like I could not find a step function where they learned that. If I look at Steve Jobs, he always knew that from the get-go, like how to do it. His interpersonal skills were refined and all of those things happened, but he was able to identify the strategy, and he was able to identify like how to get there. Elon Musk, same thing. He's had this playbook in different industries. He's created these companies that have like changed industries over and over again. If I go back to his biography, he's like, I don't see a point where it changed. Yes, his interpersonal skills became better and then did not get better at some point. So it's it's a moving graph, but the ability to see the end goal has they've always had that.
Yeah, vision. You cannot achieve great things without having the vision. And everything in between is just trial and error and figuring things out. Mukul, share with me one more time the title of your book and where people can find it.
Yeah, so the book is called Bucephalus Shadow, and it's spelled B-U-C-E, not K-E. The way the Greeks call it is Bucephalus. And it's Bucephalus is Alexander the Great's horse. And the book is called Bucephalus Shadow. You can find the ebook on Amazon, or if any of the listeners would like a physical copy, they can go to my website, mukulsheopory.com, and there are directions on that.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, insights, and ideas, especially all the beautiful stories and lessons about Alexander the Great and modern day leadership.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. This has been such an amazing conversation. Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap on today's Big Boss Biscuits batch. Thanks for spending this time with me. Whether you're commuting, folding laundry, or maybe pretending to work while you listen. And hey, no judgment. We all do this. It means a lot that you take the time to invest in yourself. So if today's conversation hit home, don't just sit there with your feelings and thoughts alone. Come say hi. Find me on Instagram at kirsten.penalosa. Connect with me on LinkedIn, just find my name, or swing by kirstenpenalosa.com. And here's the real thing. I'm a leadership and performance coach, and I help humans go from surviving leadership to certified badass leader status. And if you're the one running the whole show, I'm also an organizational consultant. I partner with companies to build workplaces so good, other companies get a little jealous. And by inducing culture, it's a whole thing. So go on, be a badass today. and grab your biscuits again next time. Until then, I'm your host, Kirsten Penalosa, and this has been another episode on your Ted Lasso-inspired Big Boss Biscuits podcast.